I have a pair of indigo-dyed linen pants that have some brown stains in a few different spots, including the knee. So I'm going to show you how I used matching fabric and thread to create a simple knee patch using a running stitch. Start by ironing really well the area that you want to cover. I like to also mark it off with a chalk just to make sure I don't miss the spots that I want to get covered. Then I double check that my fabric will cover those areas and make sure that I line up that grain line. Decide if you want your thread to stand out or match the fabric. I'm using a cotton darner needle and a pair of scissors. Thread your needle as best you can. I use a little bit of a larger eye needle so that it's easier. And then go ahead and pin the fabric that you want to patch onto your garment just to hold it in place. I don't do too many pins because I don't want them to get in my way. I start by pulling the thread through from the bottom up just through the patch, because I want to make my knot kind of sandwiched in between the patch and the garment. So I haven't tied any knot yet, and the reason I go up and then back down is so that I can just tie a simple knot right behind that patch fabric. And then the knot gets hidden as it's sandwiched in between the patch and the garment. Just trim any loose ends so that they don't poke out. Now I'm going to come back up to the top of the patch so that I can start from the top on my first stitch. I'm going to go in, I'm going to go up and down through both layers of fabric, through my patch and my clothing. And I'm probably doing about 1 centimeter per stitch. Now if you pull your thread too hard, it's going to start to bunch up. So you want to use your thumb to either hold that thread down as you're pulling your needle through, and if you boof up, just try and stretch the fabric back out as best you can and get that thread sorted out. I just follow the grain line or the weave direction of the fabric, but if it's easier for you to draw in lines to follow, go ahead and do that. And I usually try and get 4 or 5 stitches in at a time, depending on the length of my needle, so that it goes a little bit faster. Now that I'm up towards the top of my patch, I've extended my stitches a couple stitches past my patch. I'm going to go back down under the fabric and I'm going to move over the distance that I want to start my next row of stitching. So that horizontal stitch is going to be on the underside of my clothing, so you only will be able to see vertical stitches. Now I'm trying to catch that upper lip of the fabric with all of my stitches so that it kind of gets kept inside, helps reduce the fraying. You can see I'm just going up and down and making several rows of stitching here. Now, here's an example of when you pull too hard with the thread, which happens pretty often if you're not keeping a close eye on it. What you want to do is you want to pull the thread sort of backwards out. So in the line right before your most recent line of stitching, pull the thread out, and you're just kind of trying to reverse it back out and up and down the rows. Now I had a little bit extra left over, so I'm pulling it back towards the end of my stitching. You kind of just slowly jimmy it in either direction to get it all evened out, and then pull real gentle to make sure you don't pull too tight again. Now try and leave a little bit more thread than me at the end, but if you've got just enough, you need about 6 inches left. We're going to tie our knot, our finishing knot once we're at the end of our thread at the back of our fabric. So I'm pulling all the way through the patch, through the clothing to the back side. I'm gonna, just for future, I don't want this to get ever pulled too tight, especially in the laundry or something. So I'm going to leave just that tiny bubble, that tiny little bit of thread leeway. Now I'm tying a knot. Use the back of my needle to sort of back my way through that loop I just made for myself. And a double knot. It's a little bulky there. You gotta kind of pull hard sometimes depending on the needle and the thread that you're using. And barely just enough thread, but I made it. So I only made it about halfway through my patch before I ran out of thread that I had on that needle. So I'm coming back in with more thread, and I'm going to start from the other direction and work my way back towards the middle just to make sure I get all those edges that I needed to get covered. Then I'm coming through with scissors, and any little fraying bits I'm pulling off. You can see that because the linen is woven like a grid, when it isn't cut perfectly straight, some of those threads in the fabric will fray a little bit more easily, and you can just sort of pull those off with your fingers. Eventually, if they get close enough to your stitching, it'll stop fraying. So that's it. That's the finished patch.